They had chained him to a chair that could not hold what he was becoming. That was the first thing Kael Thyros understood when he stepped through the transport's lower hatch and walked the corridor to his father's cell. That the restraints were theatre now, a gesture toward a jurisdiction that no longer fully applied. The magnetic locks were rated for a man. What sat in that chair was something more than a man and something considerably less. He had tried. 3 days ago, before the transport broke from the Velaris Nebula's navigable corridor and set course for Ethan Prime, Kael had stood in the medical bay with Dr. Ireland Mars and watched her diagnostic lenses cycle through spectrum after spectrum. She had not looked at him when she spoke. She had looked at the scan results because the scan results were easier to face. The integration had passed threshold, she told him. The progenitor architecture and the man's neural architecture were no longer adjacent systems. They were the same system. To sever one was to sever both. She said it in the flat cadence of someone who had rehearsed the sentence for hours, hoping repetition would strip the weight from it. It did not. Kael had stood very still. His prosthetic left hand, matte black, its exposed joint mechanisms catching the clinical light, had not moved. He had learned, years ago, to keep the prosthetic still when he needed to appear unmoved, because flesh betrays and metal does not. He thanked her. He walked out of the medical bay. He went to the observation deck and sat beneath the scratched viewport and watched the nebula's violet clouds drift past for a long time without thinking anything at all. Then he went to keep his vigil. The first day, his father surfaced for nearly 2 hours. Kael had sat in the corridor outside the sealed cell door and listened through the audio feed. A small speaker mounted beside the locking mechanism, its green light indicating an open channel. For 2 hours, his father had been his father, precise, tactical, unsentimental. He had asked about fleet positioning. He had spoken about a trade negotiation as if it were still his business to care. He had not acknowledged the restraints. He had not asked about Kael. The second day, the intervals had shortened to 40 minutes. His father would emerge mid-sentence, as if resuming a conversation that had been interrupted, except the conversation had no beginning Kael could identify. He spoke of the War of 9 Suns, as if he had been present for it. He spoke a name, Solabri, in a tone that was not his own, a harmonic undertone beneath the familiar baritone, and the amber glow of his progenitor implant had shifted toward white for a moment before settling back. Kael had pressed his hand against the sealed door, the matte black prosthetic against the dark metal. Neither warm. Vex Karen had been watching from the moment the transport departed the nebula. In the silent choir communications hub, her encrypted terminals scrolled the cell's monitoring feed in the choir's cipher, green indicator lights blinking in asymmetric patterns. She had not been assigned to this watch, she had assigned herself. She sat at her elevated station, pale green eyes flat and operational, and she read the feed the way she read everything, as intelligence, as leverage, as a resource whose value had not yet been fully determined. By the third day, the intervals had collapsed to minutes. Island had come to the corridor twice, had checked readings on a portable scanner, had said nothing that was not already understood. The ship's hull panels nearest the cell had begun to show faint, luminous veins. The progenitor circuitry in the transport's drive systems, responding to the signal consolidating in the man behind the door, reaching toward it the way roots reach toward water. Kael had not moved from his position on the floor of the corridor, his back against the wall, his prosthetic hand resting on his knee. He had been sitting there long enough that the amber emergency strips had cycled through 2 dimming sequences and back to full. He had not eaten, he had not slept. He had kept the audio feed open and listened to the silences between his father's surfacings. Silences that were not empty, that carried the faint harmonic of the progenitor signal running beneath them like a river beneath ice. Admiral Koros had come once, on the second day, to ask whether Kael required anything. He had stood in the corridor with his dark crimson naval dress coat slightly too tight across the shoulders and his deep-set brown eyes carefully not looking at the cell door, and he had spoken with the manner of a man fulfilling an obligation he wished he did not have. Kael had told him no. Koros had nodded and walked back the way he came, and Kael had watched him go and understood that the Admiral would not come again, and that when this voyage ended, Koros would file a report that contained everything except what mattered. Then, on the third day's third hour, the audio feed crackled. Not the harmonic, not the undertone. His father's voice, the actual voice, the one Kael had grown up under, the one that had given orders across command chambers and whispered intelligence assessments across banquet tables. The one that had, once, when Kael was 7 years old and had asked why the stars were different colours, sat down on the floor of an observation deck and explained stellar classification with the patience of a man who had no patience for anything except the things that mattered to him. Kael stood. He moved to the speaker. He pressed the transmit key. "I'm here," he said. A pause. The amber glow visible through the cell door's narrow viewport, still amber, still human register, but with a tremor at its edges that meant the window was already narrowing. "I know," his father said. "I don't have long. Don't interrupt me." Kael did not interrupt him. Lord Thyros spoke in the cadence of a man reading from a document he had composed over years and memorized against exactly this moment. He said, "Dust," he said. Beneath the surface, 3 kilometers below the metallite plane, at the coordinates that would resolve if Kael spoke the Solibri glyph sequence to any active progenitor terminal. He said, the seed was not a weapon, not in the way that mattered. It was a terraforming engine, the same technology that had made Solabri Prime a garden world before the War of Nine Suns had unmade it. In the right hands, it could rebuild a biosphere from base elements. In the wrong hands, it could strip one to nothing. The houses had always assumed the second use. His father had always understood the first. But the threat of the second use, his father said, was worth more than either. He had known for 30 years, had known since before Kael was born, that House Thyros was built on a fabricated bloodline. The alliance that had given the house its seat in the post-war order had been purchased with a forged genealogy and a war crime buried so deep in the records of the Nine Suns conflict that only 3 people had ever known where to look. He had spent 30 years ensuring that number stayed at 3. He had spent 30 years building the house's reputation, its fleet, its intelligence apparatus, its fear, because fear was the only architecture that could support a structure whose foundations were a lie. And when the lie began to feel insufficient, when the other houses grew bolder, when the regent's consolidation threatened to audit bloodlines, when Kael's own broadcast of the Jessad famine evidence had cracked the house's public credibility, he had reached for the seed, not to use it, to hold it, to whisper its existence into the right ears and watch the boldness drain from every hand that had been moving against him. Terror, his father said, was the only foundation left. And he had genuinely believed, that this was a mercy, that the alternative was the house's collapse, and the house's collapse was 100,000 people on client worlds who depended on Thyros infrastructure, and the client world's collapse was a famine, and the famine was children. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The logic was the oldest logic in the galaxy. The lie that protects, the terror that preserves, the wound inflicted to prevent a greater wound. In the silent choir communications hub, Vex Karan's hand went still on her terminal. She had been transcribing the feed in real time, her fingers moving across the cipher keys with the automatic fluency of a decade's practice. And then the old lord spoke the name of dust and the coordinates and the seed's true nature, and her fingers stopped. She looked at the screen. She looked at what she had just recorded. Then she looked at the secondary terminal, the private channel, the one that connected to no one she was authorized to contact, and she did not touch it. The amber glow shifted. The tremor at its edges became a surge. For 3 seconds, the implant blazed white, and the voice that came through the speaker was not his father's voice. It was the harmonic, the undertone, the thing that wore his father's larynx as an instrument. Kael took his hand off the transmit key and pressed his back against the corridor wall and closed his eyes. When he opened them, the glow had returned to amber, but it was a diminished amber, lower, thinner, the light of a coal rather than a fire. And the voice that came through the speaker next was barely a voice at all. It was the residue of one. "The hand," his father said. "I want you to know about the hand." But the window was already gone. The amber guttered. The white took it. The seal ring on his father's restrained right hand reshaped itself in the silence that followed. Kael could see it through the cell door's narrow viewport, the living metal shifting without command, authenticating something no document had asked it to authenticate, as if the ring had heard the confession and was signing it independently of the man who wore it. The white light held. His father did not return. Kael stood in the corridor for a long time after that. The luminous veins in the hull panels spread past him, reaching down the passage toward the transport's drive core, the Progenitor intelligence extending its architecture through the ship's bones. He watched them spread and did not move to stop them, because there was nothing left to stop that he had any power over. The transport moved through the nebula's violet clouds. The white light held. Iolan found him there an hour later. She checked her scanner. She said nothing that was not already understood. She sat down on the floor of the corridor beside him, her medical synthweave coat pooling around her, the corroded data chip at her throat catching the amber emergency light, and she stayed. There was a particular kind of witness that required no words, that was constituted entirely by presence, by the refusal to leave a person alone with a truth that size. Iolan Mars had learned it in laboratories and forgotten it, and relearned it in corridors like this one. Kael looked at his prosthetic hand. Matter black. Exposed joint mechanisms. The hand his father had ordered severed when Kael was 22, in a transport not unlike this one, in a corridor not unlike this one. He had been told it was punishment. He had believed it was punishment for 11 years. He had rebuilt himself around the fact of the punishment, had made the prosthetic a refusal to hide what had been done to him, a declaration worn at the end of his arm. His father had said, "The hand," and then the window had closed. He would not know now whether the severing had been a mercy, the traitor's mark that would make the silent choir classify him as dead rather than hunted, or a dying man's self-justification dressed in the language of protection. He would carry both possibilities forward. He would carry them the way you carry anything that cannot be resolved, not in your hands, where it can be set down, but somewhere deeper, where the weight becomes part of the architecture of the body itself. He would carry the seed's location. He would carry the confession of a house built on a lie. He would carry the image of a seal ring authenticating a truth its wearer could no longer speak. And somewhere beneath the rust-orange surface of a death world that had once been a garden, a terraforming engine waited in the dark. Not a weapon, his father had said, not in the way that mattered. Patient as geology, indifferent as inheritance, dormant in the soil of a world that had been unmade once and might yet be made again. The transport moved through the nebula. In the cell, the white light did not dim. In the communications hub, Vex Karen's hands remained still on the terminal for a long time before she began, very carefully, to decide what the choir became next. In the corridor, Kael Thyros sat with what he had been given, a location, a confession, and the knowledge that his entire inheritance was a weapon his father never fired, and a lie his father never stopped believing was necessary, and held the truth the way you hold something that has already cut you, carefully, completely, and with no expectation that the holding will stop the bleeding.